Welcome to the Association of Surgeons in Training. Tonight's session, How to Write a Successful Abstract, is joined by the editor of the British Journal of Surgery, Mr. Martin Evans, the founder of surgicalresearch.co.uk and clinical lecturer of colorectal surgery, Mr. Matt Lee, and ASSET East Midlands Regional Representative, Ms. Georgia Layton. The chair of tonight's session is ASSET Jux Club Representative, Ms. Charlotte El Said.
Good evening all. Thank you for joining us for our webinar this evening. We're delighted to be joined by the BJS and hosting our webinar on how to write a successful abstract. As you all know, the ASSET conference abstract deadline is fast approaching, so we'd encourage as many of you as possible to please submit. We're delighted to be joined by an expert panel this evening, but I'm going to hand over to my colleague Georgia Layton, who is the East Midlands ASSET representative. She's going to talk you through what's going to be involved in the conference this year, and most importantly our pre-conference courses, which we're extremely excited about. As you all know, we'll be going via a virtual platform this year. Over to you. Thank you, Georgia.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm just getting my screen shared. Oh, I'm just struggling, 1 second. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. My name's Georgia. I am going to whiz you through a bit of an update about the upcoming ASSET conference, a brief overview of some key dates for your diary, and just highlighting a couple of exciting opportunities for ASSET members. So first of all, the upcoming conference. So as Charlotte mentioned, this year's conference is going to be virtual. It's going to be just as great as previous year's conferences. It's going to have just as much great content, if not more, and the opportunity of delivering it virtually has actually allowed us to bring in a variety of new sessions which will be different from anything we've ever hosted before. So the conference is going to be held online from the 5th to the 7th of March. It's going to be suitable for people from medical students all the way up to just senior registrars, pre-consultant level. It gives you an opportunity to hear the latest in clinical activity and evidence coming out of all the surgical subspecialties, and also to find out what the future holds, as well as what ASSET and our affiliated groups are doing to promote improvements in surgical training. So, as always, there will be popular keynote speakers and lectures from experts in the fields across all specialties. There'll be breakout sessions covering some more unique and interesting topics, something for everybody. And there'll also be, as always, an emphasis on well-being for trainees and surgeons in general. So this year we're going to be building on everything that we've learned in previous conferences, and everything that we learned from the really successful Medtronic virtual summit that happened at the end of 2020 to deliver basically a bigger and better conference. So first thing to be aware of, the abstract submission deadline is this coming Sunday. So Sunday, 10th of January at just before midnight. All abstracts that are accepted for poster or oral presentation will be published in the British Journal of Surgery, and the highest scoring abstracts, all abstracts are scored by multiple judges when they're submitted, will be accepted for oral presentation. There's more than 20 prizes up for grabs for posters, oral presentations and so on. So as well as an opportunity to present your work, to network with colleagues, you also have the opportunity to embellish your CV with a presentation and a prize. So the registration is open and there will be a discounted early bird rate until the 30th of January. After this, you are able to register for the conference up until the day of the conference itself, but you get better rates if you register early. Not to mention that asset members get a significant discount on their conference registration. So if you aren't already an asset member, perhaps you would consider signing up to get a discounted rate for the conference, and then throughout the rest of the year you can also reap the benefits of being an asset member beyond just the conference. So as Charlotte mentioned, this year we have a portfolio of 9 pre-conference courses. They will be on the Friday, so Friday the 5th of March. All the courses are on the same day, so you can only unfortunately attend one, even if you like the look of multiple. And they are not standalone courses, so just be aware that you can't book on just to attend one of the pre-conference courses. They are heavily subsidised and they're associated with your registration for the conference. So if you register for a course, we also expect that you would register for the conference as well. So the courses this year, there are some new courses which have never been run as a pre-conference course before. There are some that have been very popular over the years, have been running consistently 3, 4, 5 years in a row. And there's a couple of clinical courses as always, but the virtual aspect has meant that they're going to be run slightly differently. So this year there's the mini MBA course. So the MBA stands for Masters of Business Administration, and that's basically going to be an introductory level knowledge of how do you take a great idea as a student or as a trainee surgeon and translate that into a business opportunity. There is a great course that's running in association with the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. So off the back of the virtual reality and medicine courses that have been run, there is a huge amount of VR content, operative content, anatomy content, and that course will basically give you an opportunity to dial into some of that pre-recorded content and to expand your knowledge, whether that be for exams, for day-to-day in the operating theatre, or just for interest, what does a vascular surgeon do, for example. And then the clinical courses are usually very popular because of their hands-on aspects. Obviously, that's a little bit tricky this year, given the virtual nature of the conference. However, what we are offering, particularly with, for example, the cardiothoracic surgery course, which myself and a couple of colleagues will be leading on this year, we are going to still be promoting you to do hands-on dry lab surgical simulation, and the delegates that sign up for that course will receive course materials through the post. You will still get that sort of really great ratio of teacher to student practice with variety of clinical skills, for example, anastomosis. So I think this year the pre-conference courses, even virtually, are going to be great value added to a conference attendance. So just be aware that all the pre-conference courses can be booked until they are sold out, but once the places are gone, they're gone. They are all limited, so don't delay in booking them because you might then miss out, unfortunately. And finally, the last thing I just want to tell you about is for everybody who is foundation doctor, F1 or F2, we are launching our new foundation ambassador roles. So it's aimed at anybody who has an interest in involving themselves in leadership. It gives you an opportunity to join a network of surgical trainees. You will help run regional events with support from the rest of the Asset Council, and it gives you a great opportunity to gain well-supported regional leadership experience. Not to mention, again, it does provide you evidence towards your future portfolio. Let's be honest, everybody is jumping through the same hoops of training, but also more than that, gives you an opportunity to build contacts nationally through the council, through the people you can network with and meet with at the virtual conferences, virtual events, and so on. The deadline for applying to be a foundation ambassador is the 22nd of January. we do ask that you are an ASSET member when you apply, and if you have any specific queries about that role, please speak to our foundation representative, who is Rachel Core, and her email is listed on the slides above. So that's all I have to say for this evening. Thank you very much, and I will hand you back over to Charlotte and the rest of the content while you're here tonight.
Great, thank you, Georgia. That was a great summary of what we've got to offer at the exciting ASSET conference, which isn't far off, as we all know. And there are some questions coming through in the Q&A. We're going to answer them at the end in the interest of time, if that's okay. So next, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mr. Matt Lee. He's an ST6 in general surgery. He's also a clinical lecturer at the University of Sheffield in general surgery, and he's going to be talking to us this evening on how to write a good abstract. Over to you, Matt.
I'm unmuted now. Sorry, I was just having a moment. Okay, thanks, Charlotte. That's really great. I've been given the task of explaining to everyone how to write a conference abstract, but not only just write a conference abstract, but to write a conference abstract that is good and will get you not only accepted to the conference, but hopefully in for the running of one of the prizes. When you do a talk, you're meant to tell people what you're going to tell them. So we're going to talk more or less about why you do why you write an abstract, how you prepare it, how you actually write it, put pen to paper, and how you edit it, how you complete the process. So why we talk about conference abstracts and not just abstracts in general? Well, the reasons are because the abstract in a paper usually has a different function and is prepared in a different way to the abstract that you put into a conference. Now, the abstract when you write an abstract for your paper that you publish in a journal, it's usually the last part of the paper that gets written, and you have had usually months to think about the data, think about the story, think about everything, and distill it down into this sort of clearest and simplest and message that is most reflective of your study. When you are submitting to, and you bear in mind that with the journals as well, they look at the whole paper, not just the abstract as they're assessing it. When you're submitting to a conference, you've got 250 words to tell people about your study, and to really sell it and make it exciting so that people want you to come and present to talk about your work. It's also, when you're preparing this, it is usually the first time that you've really sort of pulled everything together and had to do this really pithy summary of the work that you're doing. So it means that it usually isn't quite as refined or really the same as the thing that you will come up with at the end. So it has a different function. It's meant to draw people in and get them excited about your work. And it's also not always sort of that as refined thing. So where do we start preparing to write our conference abstract? Well, actually, we start at the beginning of the project. You can't build on shaky foundations. You've got to put the effort into the project to make it good, to make it strong, in order to have a good abstract. So if your project's a bit ropey, your abstract will never be brilliant, really. At the beginning of the project, before, you should have an idea about what you're setting out to do, about what you think the end product is going to be, and what the question you want to know from your studies, and make sure that you can answer it. When you've got those foundations in, you need to make sure that your building blocks are there. Can you justify what made you do the study, why you made the choices you did about study design, and can you tell people why your findings are important? And really, that's everything you need to have together. You need to have it available to hand. You need to know what all the components, what the ingredients of your abstract are going to be. Now, some people will sometimes submit partial data to a conference, or sort of speculate that they're going to submit an abstract without the data saying this study will show or will explore. That's a bit of a questionable strategy, particularly for a meeting like ASSET, where people have to go through lots and lots of abstracts and score them. If you don't have data, you're not going to score very well. So hold off and wait for another day if you don't have everything that you need. So the next thing is your abstract. You have 200 to 250 words to tell a story. And this is a story that you're going to tell to the conference committee and the reviewers about why your paper should be presented at their meeting. And this isn't about spin or leaning heavily on secondary outcomes. It's about laying down a thread that someone can follow all the way through your abstract, and really sort of enjoy reading those 250 words. So as you're telling your story, as you know, you tell your story to your audience. If you are so for example, let's say you've done a study looking at training opportunities in surgery. If you're taking that to an educational conference, you might want to think about how, so maybe laparoscopic training surgery, you might want to talk about how people adapt their learning curves during that. If you're going to something that's a bit more clinically orientated, maybe doesn't have an education focus, you might talk about the outcomes of trainee involvement in laparoscopic, the outcomes of trainees learning laparoscopic surgery. And that's, that's just tweaking it and tailoring it. You also need to think about what findings you need to make explicit. So what is the big kicker from your story that you really need to tell people about, and really make sure that's the punchline of your story. No story, if you remember from school, from studying English at school, you remember that every story has a beginning, middle and end. It's always got a structure. It's the same for an abstract. There you are lucky in that there are actually two main guide maps for how you prepare your conference abstract. One is out on the conference website. There are conference guidelines, and they will tell you whether they want you to have a background, a methods, a results, and a discussion. They might tell you they simply want an aim, a results, and a conclusion. They will tell you how many words you're allowed to have or characters, and they'll tell you if you can sometimes you can submit a figure or a table with it. Follow those rules, because their abstract review, the conference reviewers will be looking at probably several hundred of these, and if you don't follow the rules, it's very easy to reject your abstract. So just play by the rules there. The other thing is, for whatever study design you've done, whether it's a cohort, systematic review, even a randomized trial, you need to make sure you report the key bits as per the reporting guidelines. And if you go to the Equator Network website that's there, which you can find just by searching for the Equator Network guidelines, and they have a list of every reporting guideline that you could need, and they provide tips on things that you should include in your abstracts. And if you follow the recipes and the structure that are laid out in those guidelines, that usually will get you most of the way to writing your abstract without too much difficult thought. So now you've pulled together your building blocks, and you've looked at the kind of structure and framework you need to follow. You've actually got to write the abstract. And the most difficult part of writing an abstract is writing the first draft, because a blank page is always really daunting. All you have to do here is sit down and write something. If it's a 250 word abstract, don't worry about 250 words, go to 270, 280 just to get your first lot of ideas down on the paper. Everything can be edited. You're going to come back and visit this several times, so don't be afraid of making that first draft. And then the next thing that we're going to do, the next thing to talk about is the title. So you've got your framework. You're going to start writing. What is the title of your paper going to be? What you need to do with this title is really, it's like a bright sign to draw in the reviewer so that they're excited as soon as they see the title in their review pile. And also think about when you go to the conference, your paper gets accepted, you want people to come and look at your poster, you want them to come and listen to your oral session. So you need to make sure it's interesting and catchy. There are three types of title, and I've put examples of these here. There is the questioning title, which is, as you can see, what is the purpose of an abstract? A brief presentation. That's actually quite, if you go to enough conferences, you'll recognize that as being a bit of an American style, but still perfectly acceptable. The next one is a statement which summarizes the key conclusion, and that would be in here, attention to abstract preparation is essential for acceptance. Or you could just give a sort of more general statement of what your study is about rather than a conclusion, and that's something like standards in abstract preparation, a presentation. I tend to lean towards the third type of title, but all of them, it depends on what you are doing. If you're doing a systematic review, that works quite nicely with the question type setup. If you're presenting a clinical audit with an interesting key finding, that second type of title is quite good. And I've just put out some more example titles with the more clinical relevant. You can see I've just picked out have made up a random topic. What is the impact of early transfusion in fractured neck of femur? Early transfusion is mandatory in the fractured neck in treatment of fractured neck of femur. That's a statement. And then your third type, early transfusion in fractured neck of femur, a service evaluation. So that's an overview of the type of study. So you can see how that's just a bit different. And one of those titles may actually excite you more than the others. So now we start the introduction. You have 200 words, 250 words, and you really need to, the place that really needs the work is in the methods and the results. The introduction is still important because you've got to scene set, you've got to have that beginning of your story and draw people in. So you have to be really economical, clear and concise with the words that you use here, and provide a brief summary of the clinical problem. And it's very easy to write, 4 or 5 sentences about the clinical problem. I would start off by making a statement about the general problem. Fractured neck of femur is, so for example, community-acquired pneumonia is common in patients with fractured neck of femur. And then we might say that we believe this is associated with worse outcomes. So that's we've given our big idea and then said, actually, there's part of this problem that we really want to look at closer. And so the aim of our study is to look at the outcomes of patients with fractured neck of femur and community-acquired pneumonia, which I've put there. So your other example, working from big to small, the second example is just 2 sentences. Negative appendicectomy is more common in women. The aim of this study was to assess the role of differing investigation strategies in reducing the rate of negative appendicectomy. Both those examples of introductions tell you exactly what to expect from the paper, but they're both quite economical with their word count. So then we're going to talk about the method. And this is a section that I think people often skimp on. They really don't put the effort in because they go, well, no one wants to look at that. They want to look at the results. But if you're trying to differentiate between a high scoring abstract or not, or sometimes rejection, this is where you're going to look. Again, it needs to be concise and clear. And I think you should be looking at 4 to 5 sentences. So the first sentence should, for me, when I'm writing, I would talk about, this is a kind of study design I've used. These are the guidelines I've referred to in its preparation, and this is where I've registered it, or this is my ethical approval. And then you've dealt with all the sort of boring, mundane stuff in that first sentence. And then the second sentence should talk about the sort of where you've got your data from, where you've recruited patients, talk a bit about what data you've collected, and talk about what your primary outcome or your key outcomes are in this study, and any definitions that are relevant to the abstract. You don't have to define everything in an abstract, but you need to make sure the big ideas are covered. And then sentence 5, you might put some sort of brief analysis type plan in there. Again, 1 sentence isn't enough to be comprehensive, but it's enough to paint a picture on the kind of approach you've taken. So for example, I've picked one for a systematic review because systematic reviews are pretty formulaic if you follow the guidelines. This systematic review is reported with reference to PRISMA guidance and registered on the Prospero database. That immediately says to the reviewer, this has been, we followed the rules and we've done some good practice things as well. So you can be happy this is probably a quality review. We searched the MBase Medline and central databases for trials looking at the use of laparoscopy in colorectal cancer. So that's a very broad overview where we've looked and what we've done. Then talk about inclusion. Those reporting local recurrence with it at 1 year were included. So that's 3 sentences and you've got a fairly good idea of what we're doing. And then the 4th sentence says we did a meta-analysis of local recurrence rate using a random effects model to estimate an odds ratio at 95% confidence interval. And that is easily within that. That's not going to affect your word count having something like that, but I think that looks like a pretty good abstract for a conference. Your results are going to be 3 to 4 sentences. It's one of the bigger sections of your abstract, but it's still only 3 to 4 sentences. It's probably the most difficult one to write because you want to tell everyone everything about your study, to tell them how exciting it is, but you have to control yourself. What is the key message that you wanted to put out? What's that big finding you want to talk about? So you're going to start off with big to small. You're going to say how many patients you recruited to your study, or how many papers you found through your searches, and then how many patients reached the primary endpoint, or how many studies you included. And then what's your key finding? Is it that patients who get an early transfusion have lower rates of cardiac events? That's the thing that you want to go big on there. And then if there's a relevant subgroup or secondary outcome that you think is really important, you can mention that, but you don't need to talk about every single outcome in this if you're looking for clarity and concise. So for example, this is from a systematic review of ischemic colitis. So you can see we've said we found 388 studies in our search, including 33, big to small. These were the sort of what we found. These are risk factors for the condition that, or this is how we grouped risk factors for the condition. The third bit says, this is our big finding that factors associated most strongly with this outcome were emergency treatment, and then also this finding that endovascular repair seems to be associated with lower rates of it. So you can see we work from big to small, gone heavy on our primary outcome, and then a little bit weaker on our subgroups. And then your conclusion. So by this point, you've burnt up most of your words, and I tend to find that I end up trying to trim the conclusion down quite a bit when I'm editing. You need to think about what is your take-home message from your study, and what does it mean for clinicians and researchers. You don't write 3, 4, 5 sentences trying to get the story across here. It's just short and snappy. So you might say, the other thing is that you shouldn't overstate findings from this. So if you've done a retrospective audit, you're not going to be not necessarily making massive changes to practice, because you've not, it's not a trial, it's not a major, it's not a large study that might change things definitively, but you can say in our local practice we found X or Y. And I've just put an example of a few conclusions from abstracts here. And you can see how these are all quite short and get across the story. So from a survey of UK medical students on their experience with surgical teaching, UK medical students reported uniformly low rates of satisfaction with surgical science teaching. That's one sentence, that's a conclusion. You can see from another study, mortality rates were high in patients with disseminated malignancy and those with right-sided colon cancer. And then the statement about what does this mean for people? Well, actually, we need to, further research should identify optimal management strategy to reduce morbidity for these patient groups. The further research is required is almost always a safe conclusion, particularly because there's very few truly definitive studies. The last one says lap appendicectomy carries a similar morbidity regardless of whether the appendix is inflamed. Negative appendicectomy should not be undertaken routinely during laparoscopy for right iliac fossa pain. So you see 2 sentences, it's made a story, and if you see the rest of the abstract, it's supported by the data that's there. We're not writing reams and reams. A few points about editing. So when you've written your 280 words or whatever, you need to go back through, and I can guarantee you can get very close to your word count by remembering that it is very important to remove really unnecessary and truly pointless words in the text. So if you used very, extremely, any words like that, you should probably take them out, because you'll save yourself time and you'll end up with something more clear and concise. You might also have written, in an attempt to stick to your word count, you might have also written something that uses an acronym in every other word. Now this is in every other after every space, every other space. Now this will save you on the word count, but it's going to really upset the reviewers who have to remember what the hell that acronym means. So try and stick to only commonly used acronyms or limit your use of them. Try and remember sort of a couple of my pet peeves. Spelling in abstracts. You're writing 250 words to send to a conference. You need to make sure that your spelling's right. And it doesn't hurt to just press F7 on your keyboard before submitting and making sure that everything is spot on. Things like writing words like pancreatitis instead of pancreatitis. It's always entertaining for us, but it does call into question your attention to detail in the rest of the study. 250 words is a limit. It is not a target. You shouldn't be aspiring to write 250 words on the dot. In fact, we love it if you can write a few words less than that, because we feel better about it. It's a few words less for us to read and a few minutes saved overall for everyone. And then when you've got that draft together, you've gone through it, you can't do anything else. You're writing with a team, you don't do research on your own. So send it off to your colleagues, ask them to edit it and send it back to you with track changes so you can see what the hell they've done. And if you're taking on that responsibility of being submitting author, you don't have to accept all the changes other people make, because some of them might put you over your word count. Some of them might just not be quite right or keeping with the style of the meeting. So do keep an eye on your co-authors. And then when you're done, check your formatting. Make sure you follow the rules of the conference, because it's always annoying to be over the word count or to not use the right sections. Make sure you spell check and submit it ahead of time. It's certainly true of ASIT that there is a surge in, and I think of all surgical conferences, there is a surge in abstract submission within the last 24 hours. And I'm aware of not ASIT, but some meetings where the online submission system has crashed under the weight, and that's always a little bit stressful. So make sure you do things ahead of time, he says, with 3 days left before the abstract deadline. And then when you've done all that, if you follow the rules, hopefully you just sit back and wait for the acceptance to the meeting. So well done you. So in summary, you've got to put in the time on the preparation and make sure you've had a look at all the guidelines that are there, because that takes most of your work. Write your first draft, focus on one idea and keep it simple. Check for easy edits that you can do and simple errors that you can correct, and make sure you share it with your team for feedback. So that's pretty much all I had to say on that. I hope you found it interesting. Two things. One, I do have a website which has a lot of short articles very similar to this sort of thing that will hopefully help you get going with surgical research or research skills. It's at surgicalresearch.co.uk, and I will be running an introduction to surgical research as an ASIT pre-conference course, and you'll see an outline of that appear in the next week or so. So thank you very much, and I will mute myself again.
Thank you, Matt. That was a great talk. Thank you very much. Some great pointers there. Should be very valid and going forward and submitting abstracts for next week. We've got a few questions that have come through. I'm not ignoring you all. We'll come to them at the end, just in the interest of time. So last but certainly not least, we've got Mr. Martin Evans, who's editor of the BJS. He's also a consultant colorectal surgeon in Swansea and associate professor at the University of Swansea as well. So he's going to give us some pointers, some tips and tricks on how to submit a good abstract and things to avoid. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks very much, Charlotte, and thanks to ASIT for asking me to be part of this session, and also thanks to Matt for his great presentation. Loving the purple slides, Matt. Not sure I'm brave enough. As Matt has explained, conference abstracts always have tight word limits in my experience, and it never feels like there's enough. But I'd also encourage you to try, like Matt has done, to think about the people who are marking your abstracts. They're often individuals who are busy, who are time poor, have huge batches of these things that they're marking out of goodwill. And though you may feel it's unfair, given the work you put in, they're not going to spend more than a minute or two reading an abstract of 200 to 250 words. So really try and make it as easy for them to read and like your work. Even for somebody who, depressingly, when I thought about this, has now been writing abstracts for 19 years, I find starting really one of the most painful bits, as Matt has mentioned. Find editing far easier, I will say. I think when I try and sit down to write something, I really do need solitude. I've got kids, I've got a busy professional life. If I'm going to try and write something, I really do need to be some quiet space for an hour or two to make it worthwhile. So encourage you to try and do that and not try and do it on the hoof or between cases in theatre. I think you do need time for this. I was asked to talk about hints and mistakes, and I have to say it is relatively hard following Matt, because I have to say his talk was fairly comprehensive, but a couple of things I really wanted to highlight to you. Please make every effort to follow the requirements explicitly. I'll give you an example. If you go to McDonald's and order a Big Mac with no gherkins, and they give you a chicken sandwich, you're going to be pretty fed up with them. If you're a judge asked to look at abstracts and they're not in the correct form, you're going to be pretty fed up in a similar way to you would be in McDonald's. So one piece of advice: before pressing send, please check that you follow the guidelines. In this day and age, it's quite common for abstracts to go to more than one meeting. Please don't do a copy and paste job. Please actually do a new check that you've got it right. Going back to McDonald's, they actually get it right and give you a Big Mac box, but they've added a chicken burger in the middle of it. Again, you're not going to be very happy about that. The point to this in terms of scientific writing is don't add anything to your conclusion that's not explicitly backed up in your data. As an editor, I very frequently see conclusions on a paper or an abstract that is not supported by any of the data in the study done. Stick to what you've actually done. And similarly, one of my bugbears as an editor is overstating your work. Please try and in my opinion, avoid self-congratulatory comments like this is the first time this has ever been shown. Probably isn't, and most experienced surgeons or researchers who are looking at work will realise that that's not the case. I want to use a couple of examples of what Matt and I have suggested about the importance of checking and editing the accuracy of your work. If you just have a minute to read this. I grant you it's not got a lot to do with surgery, but then if you read that as well, some of you will have realised the only difference between these two is the use of punctuation. The point is, punctuation can be a powerful tool, but also remember, when it comes to scientific writing, your readership may not have English as its first language, so try and keep your sentences short and the language as simple as possible. It's not an A-level in English that you're writing for. To illustrate that point further, I just want to have a look at what one of my predecessors at the BJS did to this discussion that came into him. As you can see, the top one is fairly wordy, and if you read through it and then have a look at the one on the bottom, what I hope you'll agree is actually the second one conveys exactly the same information, but with less than half the words. And this is the point of editing. You can get this down to these sorts of numbers without loss of meaning. As has been mentioned, I'm lucky enough to work with the team at the BJS, and I have to say it's one of the things I enjoy most about my professional life. And most of you will know something about the BJS, I suspect, but to start at the beginning, well, it is called the BJS, not the British Journal of Surgery. It was an amalgamation of the British Journal of Surgery and the European Journal some years ago. Hence, the BJS is not the abbreviation. I have to say, personally, I don't get upset if people call it the British Journal of Surgery, but some of my European editors do get particularly concerned when we do that. BJS currently has two journals, BJS and BJS Open, which are overseen by an executive team of the BJS Society, which is a charity. BJS is lucky enough to have one of the highest impact factors in the general surgical journals worldwide, and is the highest in Europe. Typically, we are a bastion of what was the old general surgery, that is GI, breast, endocrine, vascular. I will say we're happy to take anything or consider anything. And certainly the more general things related to training and surgeons generally is something that we'd have an appetite for. BJS Open is a new enterprise for the Society and is an entirely open access journal. There are a couple of reasons why this was set up. As you will hear more about in a minute, typically BJS only has enough space for about 10% of the papers that we get in. And that's due to a page limit that's agreed between the publisher and the Society. So editors, we have to keep to a page budget. The consequence of this is we do have to reject some really good stuff, and the BJS Society wanted to try and keep that within our brand rather than let our competitors have it. So we set up BJS Open to take that work. As the name implies, it is an entirely open access journal, and this means the author is unfortunately the one who pays for production of the article. I say unfortunately, but I do think this is the future of publishing. If you look at BJS Open, the cost for most people is £1,200. As asset members, you do get a 50% discount on this. It's not typical in Britain at the moment, but certainly if you speak to our European counterparts, they expect to pay for open access publishing now. It's usually part of the grants that they get to do most of their research, that it will be published open access. And this is the way that journals are moving, I think, in the future. As of today, BJS Open doesn't have an impact factor, but it is predicted to have one next time they're given out, and it's predicted to be somewhere between 2 and 3. So I think it is a worthwhile place to think about publishing if you're offered that. The BJS, the dawning of a new year, also marked a change of publisher for us. And I just wanted to point out, if you are trying to submit something to us, we're now with Oxford University Press, and the web page for that is at the bottom. One of the things that was always a bit mysterious to me before I became a journal editor was how the peer review and journal processes work. So I thought I'd walk you through it with what we do at the BJS. Once you've submitted your work, very early on, within a day at most, one of the team in the office checks that all the information that is needed is included. Providing it is, it then gets assigned to our editor-in-chief, at the present time is Professor Des Winter from Dublin. He at least twice a week then screens all of these submissions, and if clearly it will never be appropriate for us, he'll reject it at this stage. I have to say this does happen to a minority of papers, and really it's stuff that probably shouldn't have come in. For example, it's case reports that we don't take as a journal. Provided he is happy that it really should sort of come through the process, he then allocates it to one of the team of editors. And at the moment there are 7 of us, each with slightly different subspecialty interests. We all work differently, but if you look at what I do with it, well, I spend 2 or 3 occasions a week. I'll go through my BGS inbox and then send papers out for review or look at reviews that have come in. If I get the paper and think, actually, I don't think this is going to be for us, I have to then check that with 2 other BGS editors before I can reject it. And the point of this is I know having something rejected without peer review is upsetting. But from our side of it, we do need to do this for a couple of reasons. First is it gives it back to you to submit somewhere else without delay. And as a trainee, that means you can hopefully get it published earlier than it would have been if we have it for a few weeks and then give it back to you. Second is we're really reliant on the goodwill of our peer reviewers, and we don't want to overburden them with work that clearly we're never going to entertain accepting. If we're happy it should go out for peer review, we select 3 reviewers first up. They're asked to turn it round in 2 weeks for us. Usually we wait for 3 reviews, but if we have 2 reviews that very much agree this is definitely a no, we'll usually make the decision as early as possible. As a team of editors, we're asked to turn this round in under 21 days from the time it arrives to us to get to a first decision. And if you look at the averages over the first years, last few years, this is what we achieve. Although, as with anything, there is a bit of a tail with it because reviewers let you down or reviews are contentious and you need another reviewer. Once we're at a stage where we think that we can make a decision, well, I will say I've never just accepted a paper at this stage. It's never come in, been out for peer review and then bang, it's accepted. It will always need some revision. And point to this from your point of view is if you get a letter back saying that we can't accept it at the moment, invite you to submit a revision. I just want to point out this really is good news. This means that the journal wants your work, and as long as you work with them, it's more than likely to get published. If your work's not in this category, we offer a couple of other choices other than just straight rejection, and that's one, offer to transfer it to BGS Open, and you can accept that if you're prepared to pay for that. But we also are sometimes asking people to submit shortened versions of their work in a letter format, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Unfortunately for us, the majority of the papers we do have to reject, and just to look at some data on this from the last year, well, I asked one of the team in the office to get this out for me this week, and we've had a phenomenal number of submissions this year. We're up 50% on the year before, so over 2,700 submissions. You could say COVID has been good for something in that respect. I think people are getting research out that's been sat on the shelf a while, or there's a lot of COVID related stuff coming through. A typical year, we reject about 20% without review. Last year it was 38%, and I think that is that a lot of not the best COVID stuff has come through, and we have had to send that back without review. To date this year, we've only accepted 4% of submissions, and this is low, but there's a tail on this because imagine papers submitted in November and December are not at the process point where we're going to accept them yet. It's likely this will be just under 10% this year, and last year that was the case at 10%. About a third of the work we offer open transfer. There have been some changes in the last couple of years in what we publish. We've always published the stuff that you'd expect a journal to publish on the left-hand side, but I thought I'd just talk you through some of the new options that we've got. A couple of new submission categories. One is rapid research communications, and these are abbreviated papers to about 1,200 words or so, looking to get new or exciting research. An example would be description of the first 5 cases of this new surgical technique. Historically, BGS wouldn't have been able to take this because of the space in the issue, in the journal issue. The next one is cutting edge reviews, and these are beyond systematic reviews and meta-analysis. They're sort of more opinion type reviews from often leaders in the field, and we do generally commission these, but if you had a great idea for one, I'd encourage you to contact me or one of the other BGS team. We're always happy to engage in conversation about stuff. Needlepoint, similarly, are shorter controversial topics in surgery, and this is very new for us. The first one of these was published last month. That looked at the role of neoadjuvant chemotherapy for rectal cancer. We are really conscious as a journal and a brand to engage your generation of early career researchers. So we have spent some time and effort in trying to increase our social media presence. And I have to say, Matt's been really helpful for this from the society side of things. We've now got Twitter and Instagram accounts. We've got a surgical blog. Will say personally, I'm not a huge consumer of social media away from the BGS stuff, but I think from the journal's perspective, it's really quite important. From the discussions that I see and I've been involved with on Twitter, I think it can act as an online journal club where opinions are shared, and I really like to see as much engagement from people like you as possible to critique and hopefully improve the science behind what we publish and improve it going forward. I also wanted to flag a new category that we've got this year that was introduced to help with COVID dissemination, but it's something we're going to carry on with. These are research letters to the editor, and I think for somebody as an early stage researcher, this is a good opportunity to publish something with BGS. They're 600 word pieces that can describe a research study or opinion about something. There's a lot of these now on the website, so if you're looking for an idea of what you want to publish or some ideas of how you could do this, just have a look at that. Again, if you've got any questions about it, I'd be delighted to answer them from you. We've also this year introduced a blog, Cutting Edge, and Matt was part of this, and I have to say I quite enjoy reading this. It's slightly different content from the journal. It's perhaps meant to be more thought-provoking, and I think there are some really insightful pieces on here. And again, if you've got something that you want aired, some examples there, just contact me, or I know Des Winter's always happy to be contacted to discuss something for this. Final piece of BGS selling before we move on, well, scientific surgery. For any of you approaching exit exams, I really do think this is gold dust. Our former editor-in-chief, Jonathan Earnshaw, spends a fair amount of time on a monthly basis doing this, and essentially hunts down every surgically related RCT that's been published in any journal, and then provides a summary in this scientific surgery section of the web page. It is published in the journal. I think if you're coming up to exams, it is well worth a read. So what about young BGS? Some of you may have heard of it. I will say at the start, you are all more than welcome. It was started approximately a year ago. It is in its infancy, but there are plans to expand and develop it. It represents really a community of early career researchers with enthusiasm for surgical academia. As I said, it is free to join. All specialties and countries are welcome. The aims of it, well, stated aims are for young researchers to gain editorial experience. There's a plan for certified program to come through the BGS Society that you can enroll for. It's hoped that it'll provide an educational forum to work towards a repository of online digital platform, and we have historically delivered how to write papers and how to review paper courses. The plan from our side is to try and put these online, free to access for anyone to get their hands on them and take their research forward. I think most importantly in my eyes, it really provides a platform for national and international collaboration. If you have a look at the heat map for the young BGS at the moment, there's about 1,300 people involved or registered with it. You can see this really is a global thing, and I think this will be an exciting thing to take collaborative research forward, which we've seen so many successes with this in recent years. Thanks very much again for inviting me. If anyone's got any questions or they want to ask me anything, feel free to email me. That's my email address. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. That was a great talk. I'm going to go over to the Q&A now, because I'm aware that we've only got 12 minutes left on the clock. So first one over to you, Georgia. Can I submit more than one abstract to the conference?
Yeah, so we encourage everyone to submit any work they think is appropriate. We ask that you don't submit more than 2 abstracts as a first author. So personally, if you're first author, please only limit your submissions to 2. However, if you did, collaborated on a piece of work and therefore are mentioned on more than 2 abstracts, that is okay, as long as you are not the first and presenting author on 2 or, well, more than 2, should I say.
Great, thank you, Georgia. So Matt, I'm going to take a question over to you. So someone's just asking, if they're submitting an abstract to one conference, can they submit the same to another conference and vice versa?
So I saw that question come through. That generally speaking, it's all right to submit to present the same or similar abstract to a small regional meeting than a national meeting. It's sometimes, or it can be frowned upon to present the same piece of work at multiple international meetings, and many of the meetings do have that as a stipulation. The specific question here was about ASGBI and ASSET, and from memory, I believe that it was accepted that you could present the same work at both because of the relationship between the organizations. So I think for that specific example, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But as Martin said, think about sort of how you tweak the abstract.
No, thank you. And another question, what are the recommended headings for a case report abstract? And that's open to anyone.
There are a set of guidelines out there called the CARE guidelines, which you can find through the Equator website. Generally speaking, it's a summary of the patient and the clinical problem, what was interesting, how you managed it, and then so patient and problem, how we managed it, and then a section on how it, what else does the literature say about this? So sort of mini literature review within that makes it a good case report, and then a little conclusion at the end. So that's, I would say, patient and problem, treatment, wider literature, and then our recommendations or our take-home message.
Can I just add to that the BMJ case reports have a pro forma that you can fill in, which is when you're writing up a case report publication. It's going to be too detailed for submitting a case report abstract, but it can be really useful for helping you structure your case report, the data you need to collect, and then you can just condense that down when you're then submitting it as an abstract.
Okay, thank you. And another question, what makes a presentation prize-worthy? I think, Matt, you touched on this.
An abstract that knows what it's talking about, that has a very clear thread to follow through, that's in 250 words can be very interesting, even with data that perhaps isn't the most exciting. So that clear story, ideally you've done a good study as well, so you just start with that preparation that I mentioned in the first place. I don't know, Martin, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does perhaps depend a little bit on the audience, as all these things do, and it depends what meeting you're talking about. But for international meetings or national meetings like ASGBI or ACP, I think probably there's got to be a novelty value for it. People who judge these abstracts usually are the old guard of the societies who will have seen things before, and you need to tickle their fancy. Now, how do you tickle their fancy? Well, new is good. Really well done stuff. I have to say, when I judged abstracts for national meetings, I'm less inclined to accept systematic reviews, because I'm not sure personally that I think that's the best forum for a systematic review, an 8-minute talk on a stage. But equally, that they have their merits, and I think it's about where you're going. I'd always think about what meeting it's going to say how you structure what you want to do, and I think that is important.
Brilliant, thank you. So another question, if I submit my abstract, but my original article is not ready, will it still be acceptable?
For a conference, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Georgia, are there any questions that you wanted to ask?
We had a couple of questions about the courses, specifically can medical students attend? I would say all the pre-conference courses, the outline of the programmes and the target audience is listed in great detail on the ASSET website, and in the Q&A answered sections there is a direct link there. The question was specifically about one of the clinical cardiothoracic ones. The answer is absolutely. We encourage students to get involved. If a course is not suitable for students because it's going to be a bit too, you don't want to be doing a pre-consultancy preparation course, then it will make it clear in the programme. So just have a quick look before you book, but absolutely students are welcome on pretty much all of the courses.
No, definitely. Would data from a service evaluation be under audit or under the surgical speciality, as there's no guidance to compare the data to? Matt, do you want to take that?
I don't know. That's a conference organising thing. And I'm not on the organising committee. I'd tag it as probably the specialty, and then it can get, if they want to put it in audit, they can reallocate it to audit, because it's just for ease of reviewing and things do get moved around.
Absolutely. And Georgia, another one back to you about the courses. If you've already booked onto a course, can you change it to a different one?
To be honest, I don't know for sure. It shouldn't be a problem. I would email the ASSET admin email, which I think is info@asset.org. I'll double check that for you and pop it on the answers in a second. And if there's space in the course that you want to go on to, I think it might be okay, but I need to clarify that. So can't say for definite, but hopefully where we can, we will facilitate people swapping onto other courses.
So I've got a question. So say your abstract gets rejected and you're feeling a bit disheartened. What would you all advise? We've all been through
it. Yeah.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I would say that if you've written a half decent abstract, it will get into most meetings. Poster, most things are at least poster worthy. And as long as you followed the rules and written something vaguely interesting in the correct language, then you should be in with a shout. I can, from when I've reviewed abstracts, I can think of a handful which I've looked at and gone, oh my god, what is this? This, it's clearly not ready. So most of the work that people submit is actually good enough to present. So I wouldn't worry about that. If you do get rejected, then go ahead and cathart about it, and then just have a look and see which rules you didn't follow and fix it for next time.
And just playing devil's advocate, I had a piece of work recently rejected, no post presentation, nothing, and then now it's been accepted for sort of main stage oral presentation at a national conference. So don't take it personally. It may just be that it's not the right conference for that piece of work. It's not necessarily a comment on you as a writer and that you're never going to get anywhere or be successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely right. Picking the audience, you're absolutely right.
Definitely, yeah.
The other thing to remember is the peer review process is slightly flawed. That it's usually just one or two persons' opinions on a piece of work that you would have spent hours and hours and hours writing, and that is slightly unfair, but I've yet to come up with a better system for it. And same with abstracts, you're probably going to get one or at most two people scoring it, so it is subjective.
Absolutely, thank you. I think that's true. Just don't give up is the key, really. Georgia, is there anything else you wanted to add? We've got 3 minutes on the clock.
No, I think you guys covered everything in great detail tonight. I wish I'd known this when I was starting out writing abstracts. I think persistence, practice as well. Try and find someone a bit senior who's done this before, who can support you. Just ask your friendly registrar if they'll have a quick read of your abstract before you submit it, and that kind of thing. And practice makes perfect. That's how I think I've improved a little bit.
Absolutely, and probably get all the authors to read it before you submit it as well. Is another bit of advice from myself. So we're coming to a close now, but we've had a few questions about whether or not this recording will be made available, and it will be. It will be made available later on tonight. As you can see on the screen, we've got an advert for the upcoming conference. Please don't forget that the deadline for abstract submission is next Monday at midnight. As Matt said, don't leave it to the last minute. So get on it as soon as you can. It should be a link as well as to how
And
to...
Sunday, not Monday, sorry.
There you
Sunday.
go. I'm getting my dates wrong, excuse me. Thank you, Georgia. Thanks for saying. And thank you to all our panelists this evening. You've given us a great talk and been very insightful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Georgia.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers, bye.